Welcome back. Now, a wide diversity of more than 1,000 delegates from over 200 organizations participated in the first national convention of the National Dialogue on Friday and Saturday at the University of South Africa in Tshwane. Now, convened by President Cyril Ramaphosa, the process comes at a time when South Africa is grappling with a number of social challenges such as crime, corruption, gender-based violence and femicide, and unemployment. So to help us reflect on this first national convention of the National Dialogue and, of course, the way forward, we're joined virtually now by Professor Tinyiko Maluleke, who's the co-chairperson of the National Dialogue's Eminent Persons Group. Prof, so good to have you with us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you very much, Sakina. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak to you after a long time.
Indeed. Prof, first off, just your assessment of the first national convention of the National Dialogue that was held this past weekend, and also your assessment of what worked, what didn't work so well, and of course what needs to be improved upon.
Well, what worked is that we started the dialogue. It wasn't a perfect start, but it was a good start. And I think it worked that South Africans responded. I mean, the hall was full. I'm told that there was more than 1,000 people and more than 200 organizations represented. Of course, the National Convention is only the beginning. It's the launch of the dialogue. It is not the actual dialogue itself. So for such a response, I think we can be satisfied that we are off to a good start. And I don't know if we should say, that there was something that worked or didn't work. A process such as this is by definition a process. It's not an event. So we have begun a process. The trigger has been pulled. If this was an athletic competition, the whistle has been blown. If this was a rugby match, and the match has started. And I think we must be thankful to South Africans and those who were working off stage to ensure that this happens.
So as per your assessment of what we saw on Friday and Saturday, what do you think needs to be done to make this process more inclusive, and also what can be done to allay the fears of those who are critical of what this is meant to achieve?
Inclusivity is a non-negotiable for a process such as this. No door must be closed at any time or during this process. Everyone who is not inside must constantly be invited and be persuaded to come inside. Even those who have walked away, I think we cannot give up on them, because such is the nature of a process as this. And we, especially those of us in the Eminent Persons Group, we'll do our best to be constantly reaching out to them, seeking their voices, seeking their advice, because I'm here to meet anyone, Sakina. So I meet people who say, we want the dialogue and therefore we are participating. And I meet people who say, we want the dialogue, but we think it should be improved this way and that way. I meet people who say, I don't want the dialogue, but then continue to indicate that they've got issues. So what is happening is that there is consensus that we need a dialogue. And the disagreements are not about that. They're about the form and shape and, of course, the possibility of whether it yields the results that people want.
And to that point, Prof, I think many people who are skeptical of dialogues that produce reports that ultimately just gather dust, and there are no tangible change that will move from that particular dialogue. I think that is what people are most critical of.
I sympathize with that, and I actually understand it. I'm a South African, and I know deeply the frustrations that South Africans have had and the disappointments they've had over the time with lack of implementation, with promises made that are not fulfilled. So it is completely understandable that they feel like that. But I do want to say that precisely because they feel like that, they need to come in and help us address these issues. Now, the argument is made often that we know the problem. I think that is very presumptuous half the time, not in each case, but half the time it is presumptuous. It is people who assume that they know everything about everyone, and that can't be true. We don't know what it feels like to live in a house where the sewage is pumping in your living room. We don't know what it feels like to have not had electricity for the past 30 years at all. So we can't claim that we know. We know the numbers of the unemployed, but we don't know their lives. And the dialogue is intended for people not to be represented for a change, but to come in and speak for themselves in their own names, in their own voices. And this is the point, and not for others to say we know the problem that they have and therefore we will speak for them. And I think there is a deep-seated phobia or fear that people may not speak for themselves. I think we should get rid of that phobia and allow people to speak for themselves for a change in their own voices. That's what the national dialogue is all about.
So how is that going to happen, Prof? Because I think that's a very important point, because it raises the question, if you take the National Convention, for example, this weekend, who decided on who was to be in the room? Who decided on whose voices gets to be heard? All of that, is something that needs to be explained to South Africans. That level of transparency is absolutely necessary if this process is to find the necessary buy-in from the citizenry.
Fortunately, the national dialogue itself will take place at the Stokvels, at the church gatherings, at the burial societies, at the mañanos, at the mosques and churches. And so people will be able to speak in their own voices in those spaces. That is the intention. Of course, questions of representativity in the national dialogue, especially the National Convention itself, rather, are valid and legitimate, and we should learn from them. But as I sit here, I am in awe of the preparatory work that was done by the foundations, the preparatory task committee, task team, I think it was called a committee initially, and those who joined hands to do a lot of groundwork, engaging civil society, some of whom we saw represented at the National Convention, preparing the program. It took them at least a year to do that, and I think we should be thankful for them. I understand people criticizing that, why is so-and-so not here and so here? Those are fair questions, but I think not take away from the amazing hard work that the preparatory committee has done, and I think it almost worked perfectly. It didn't quite, but it almost worked perfectly. We can make it more perfect as we go forward.
So there's also been criticism, Prof, from some in society that the national dialogue, given what we've seen already, will not be citizen-driven and rather government-driven. We've seen the legacy foundations withdraw, stating similar concerns. What's your take on that?
It's a very important point. This process cannot be government-driven. This process cannot be driven by the elites. It cannot be driven by political parties. Of course, all of them have an important voice, an important role to play, but for a change, it is citizens who must drive this process. It is they who must speak for themselves in their own voices. And there is a sense in which this is the holy grail of national dialogue. So we, for our part, are prepared to do everything we are able to ensure that this is not a process where only a particular set of voices is heard, which is directed by a particular set of voices. Citizens must come and take charge of this process, and citizens must take their country back. This is the ultimate aim of the national dialogue, because we know that our country has gone off the rails, and we can't expect the same people who have been there when we went off the rails to then try and provide solutions. We are making a detour and saying, citizens, take over. This is for you to lead. This is for you to speak. And for a change, I hope that the elites and the politicians will listen.
And that's a critical point. It's an interesting point as well, because you are saying that the citizens should now take over. Why didn't it start with the citizenry and then filter upwards? If you take the eminent persons, for example, Prof, again, in explaining to people, how was this group chosen? Who makes those decisions in terms of who the voices will be? And then also, taking that transparency slightly further, one of the things that I tried to get an answer to this weekend was how much has been budgeted for this entire exercise? And the answers are elusive. So don't you think it's important that we speak openly and freely about these things? Because there's nothing to hide, really, if this is meant to help us as a society move forward.
I couldn't agree with you more. Transparency of the highest order is required if this process is to be credible. What I can't answer is, of course, how and why the president elected me and 31 others to be in the eminent groups. I think he would be best positioned to answer that question. But what I can tell you is that I am immensely humbled to be working with the caliber of South Africans that are in the Eminent Persons Group. I mean, the John Kanis of this world, the Imitias Suleimans of this world, the Brigelia Bams of this world, the Sia Kolisis of this world. I can't but be in awe. And I don't know that we should go so far as to try and tarnish these great South African patriots whose only aim is to try and help the country and contribute their expertise and their time. They are not getting paid for it, and they don't want to be paid for it.
And you see,
so
Prof,
I think the presidency may explain how they were chosen, but from where I'm sitting, I'm humbled that they were chosen, and I happen to be one of them. And we want to help the country. We want to contribute. We mean well. As a group of eminent persons. And as for why were the citizens not included in the beginning, I think they were. The preparatory task team of which we are speaking consisted of foundations. It consisted of civic society groups. It, of course, consisted of government representatives, but it was built in such a way as to include the voice of civil society. Now, of course, a week before the National Convention, there were differences, but we can't take away from the hard work that was done by the foundations, and that's why the foundations are needed back in the process going forward.
And that's another thing, Prof. You see, for this convention to have legitimacy and, for people to feel like they can come in, as you had invited earlier, when people are critical or ask questions, that does not mean that is necessarily a negative thing. Asking how people were appointed does not necessarily seek to tarnish their good reputations. It's a question. How was this decided upon. And I suppose...
Which I answered as best as I can from where I sit, not being the president who chose them.
I'm just making the point that in asking the question, there's no one is seeking to tarnish anybody's reputation. It's simply asking a question: how, why? And this is what the dialogue is about. And we are out of time. But Prof, I'm sure we're going to have so many more conversations around this particular matter as it goes forward, as we move to the dialogue part of it. But we have to park it there for this morning. Professor Tinyiko Maluleke, Co-Chairperson of the National Dialogue Eminent Persons Group, reflecting on the first national convention of the National Dialogue and, of course, the way forward. And you can give us your views in responding to the question of the day.